and that maybe they don't need like sexual abuse, physical abuse of families that are facing some of the toughest. We know it's not just touch to information, and there are media a lot more than we want. Asperger, decipher between regular caretaking and sometimes their behaviors are masked because of covers up the fact that they're acting out because of 5.5 years. I worked with families so the kicker was that little girl, that's when they were still calling it the spectrum, right? Because that was easier for her. So that other kids get right away. 8 million children in the next 18 years will experience 5 or more types of trauma. So kids that come see Polly and I, and Brandon, who's why is this happening? And if you don't, so on top of everything, we also know that kids are 50% more likely to tell a teacher because that's their safe person. That's the person they see, right? I'm very well aware that teachers are helping raise my children because I'm working, right? And they're going to school. They play such a valuable role. These kids are starting to harm themselves at younger and younger ages. I did an interview with a 12-year-old who, by the time she had come to see us, had already tried to hang herself twice. She said, that rope shouldn't have been there or I wouldn't have done it. Right? Whoever left the rope there. We see kids that are starting to harm with eraser burns and the metal ends of pencils, whatever they can get their hands on. Even kids in JDC are figuring out where to get sharp objects so that they can take some control over their bodies and release some of those emotions because they don't know what else to do. Kids younger and younger are talking about suicide. They're talking about taking their own lives because they see that as the only option out. They don't see it as final. They look at the media, they see that it's been glamorized, and that you get a lot of attention, and it's an end to a means of having that loop that goes constantly in their head about how this was their fault, right? They should have said something, they should have tried to stop it. That's that loop that they're trying to quiet when they start self-harming, they start cutting. So these kids then become adults that are more likely to have physical issues, gastrointestinal issues, develop cancer. Stress wreaks havoc on our bodies. So when we're talking about child sexual abuse, we're talking about the worst amount of stress that a child can face. That manifests in a body. So kids will often talk about having tummy aches. I don't want to go somewhere. I don't feel good. I don't like when I'm with that person, right? They're more likely to be smokers or alcoholics, twice as likely to use alcohol. That same 12-year-old that had tried to hang herself was using alcohol that her parents were bootlegging. 3 times as likely to become drug addicted. So we go back to that loop that kind of goes off in their brain, and they're just trying to quiet the noise. And if that means drugs, or if that means alcohol, or if that means promiscuity, relationship that's not healthy for them, that's what they're going to do. They're going to try to take control of that situation, and it's happening at younger and younger ages. So what are you looking for? When we talk about recognizing, I want to acknowledge that you're the experts on your children, right? Nobody knows your children like you do. But we talk about these signs and symptoms on a spectrum, right? It's not a checklist. We get a lot of panicked calls from parents that say, oh, my kid's been bedwetting, something must have happened. But we want to look at what's different for them. We want to look at what's changed for them. So nightmares and night terrors are different. Night terrors happen in the first 2 to 3 hours of sleep. That's when your toddler's off their routine, maybe they didn't get enough rest, something's not right in their little world, right? Nightmares happen in the last 3 to 4 hours of sleep. The kid's going to be able to wake up, maybe they'll be able to describe what happened. They'll be able to talk about it. So I have a 12-year-old, and when he was 11, he comes to me and he says, Mom, I had a nightmare, I can't sleep. So he was a normal sleeper, so I immediately pay attention. Buddy, tell me what's going on. I can't tell you, you're going to be mad at me, I'm going to be in trouble. Now I need you to talk to me. So this goes back and forth. And eventually, through tears, he says, somebody showed me something on their cell phone. You're going to be really mad at me. Well, I have a friend, Holly. And what does she see on cell phones every day, right? What do I talk to kids that they see on cell phones? So I was like, buddy, you gotta tell me. I can't help you if you don't tell me. And he goes, Mom, you know that 5 Nights at Freddy's video? That
car is going to come get me. Like, I'm just convinced. He knew what to get my attention was. But I didn't call Holly, and I didn't call my friend Brandy to say, I'm bringing my kid in, you're going to interview him, right? I said, tell me about that. And I let him give words to it. So sometimes we want to jump to these conclusions. We, as parents or caretakers, assume the worst, right? Let that child give words to what's going on for them. We know kids that toileting issues get a little tricky, right? For those of you that have small children, your house is in a complete stage of undress at various points in the day, right? You spend a lot of time in and out of the bathroom while that kid is potty training. That's normal. And if you send your kid to grandpa's and they have an accident, when they come home, it's probably not a big deal. Grandpas are not great about keeping potty training schedules, right? That's just not what it's priority for them. But if as you're sending them to your parents' house and you tell them that their cousin Wyatt's going to be there and they have an accident before they go and while they're there and when they come home, and you kind of brush it off, and the next time they go and Wyatt's there, they have an accident before they go and while they're there and when they come home, what's different? Looking at what's changed about that environment, because now it's becoming a pattern. It's now changing what is their norm. And that happens for eating too. Kids will feast or famine, right? They'll either eat you out of the house or home, or they won't eat anything for weeks. So my kid has to have a snack every time she gets off the bus. She thinks she's starving. She just had a snack at school, but she's certain that she's going to die within the next 20 minutes if I do not feed her something. That's her normal. So if my daughter, who gets off the bus, suddenly says, I don't really feel like eating, that's going to be my first alarm that something's going on with her. That's a pretty big change for her. So she gets off the bus and she doesn't really want to eat, and she picks through dinner. And breakfast goes okay. I talk to her teacher, lunch is all right. But the minute she gets off that bus, she doesn't want to eat again. What's going on? A lot of mistake that I see parents make is that they assume because it's in a car or a bus that something couldn't happen. Can something happen on a bus, Holly? I used to think that my kids were totally safe. I said, sit right behind the bus driver, right there. They can always see you. And then I did a string of interviews where there was full contact, 3 seats behind the bus driver, between 2 little kids. If kids want to do it, like if they want to figure out, they'll figure out a way to how to do it, right? So we want to be cognizant that it doesn't matter if they're in a car with somebody they've carpooled forever, or they're on a bus. We want to look at what's different for that child and allow that child to express what's going on for them. This is the big one. We get a lot of concerned questions about this, right? My daughter said she had sex on the playground. I'm pretty sure that something's happened to her. Like, you have to interview her. So your 6-year-old came home and they said that they had sex on the playground. How many of you would probably be alarmed by that? I would. And it's easy to go in panic mode. Allow them to give words to that. So I talked to my son, who's 12 and very miserable about this fact, but I talk to him about his body all the time. I've learned really early not to give him too much information. So I said, Bryce, have you heard any new words at school? He said, like what? He knows this game already. And I said, like the S word. He's like, I've heard a couple, which S word? I said, well, you know the S word that happens between a guy and a girl. Have you heard an S word like that? And he goes, yeah, I heard that word. Now, I immediately could have jumped into, all right, this is what that means, and this is what you use, and this is what, but I've learned my lesson the hard way. So I said, what do you think that means? Or what did you hear that means? He goes, well, my friend Brandon said that it's when a guy puts his limousine in a girl's garage. Okay, that's not completely wrong, but that's not what we call it. Those are some pretty optimistic 5th graders, by the way, limousines into garages. But for him, he could tell me what body parts he knew that kind of what was talked about, but he wasn't able to go in and describe how you're using those parts or what happens. So we go back to that mom who calls frantically and says her 6-year-old said the sex word. I believe you took this call, if I'm remembering correctly. Holly took this call from this mom, and Holly says, ma'am, ask your daughter what that word means, so you can kind of hear her whispering off to the side. And she comes back and she says, It means hand-holding, right? There we go. Right, don't do it until you're 40. The reality here is that kids can't describe something they haven't experienced. We know that teens are inundated with images and all of this media, but for little kids, they can't describe what that is. If they pick up a word from their older sibling or out on the playground, just let them give words to it. If they can describe what it is, or you know that they're using like the right names or physical signs of that, then it's time to be a little more concerned and talk to some professionals. But allowing kids to give words to things will help fill in all those details and keep us from jumping to conclusions. Some kids don't like some people, right? Some people, like, I have two sisters. My older sister does not have a relationship with my kids. That's how it's always been. They know she exists, but they're not really crazy about her. My daughter will drop me in a moment's notice for my middle sister. She loves her Aunt Melissa. She will go anywhere with her. So if my sweet little 10-year-old came to me and said, I don't want to go shopping with Aunt Melissa. First off, if a 10-year-old doesn't want to go shopping, we have some big issues there. But if she said, I don't want to go with her, I don't want to spend time with her, I don't want to go to her house, I don't want to spend the night, what's different? So if a kid has never liked a person and all of a sudden, and they're like, I don't want to spend time with them, that's okay. They don't have to like everyone. But if they're that person's best friend and all of a sudden they're backing off from that relationship, ask that kid what's going on. And I say that on the flip too. So if you have someone that hasn't had a relationship with your kid and all of a sudden they're spending a lot of extra time and they're giving a lot of extra gifts, or they're really seeming intent on spending time with your child alone, it's time to question those motivations, right? What is making them want to spend time with my kid? Ask your kid about that relationship and what's changed. So obviously, I always put this one up here and I get like, duh, if she's pregnant or has an STI, or that she's obviously had sex with someone, right? That's a duh. But we put that up here because we have sat across from teenagers who are pregnant and we've said, I have your test. I see you're pregnant. Tell me what happened. And they told us to kick bricks. If you have teen kids and something is going on in their life, it's their decision whether or not they tell you. And I think that that's a really scary part of being a parent, because my 12-year-old's starting to get to that phase where he's like, I don't want to talk to you about that. I don't want to have this conversation with my mom. And it becomes harder and harder for him to tell me about like what's going on at school and how relationships are. So even as parents, you might have physical evidence that something has happened, and if she's not ready to talk about it or he's not ready to talk about it, there's nothing we can do to make them talk. But we still have those conversations with them. We still let them know that we know, and we still have things that we're going to do to help keep them safe. But the reality is it's on their terms completely. When kids are going through trauma or they're going through some sort of abuse, a lot of kids, older kids, will start wanting to run away or take risk-taking behaviors because they're trying to take control. Kids don't wake up one day and want to run away. Right? I tell people that all the time. They don't just wake up one day and decide that home is not the place they want to be. There's usually something leading up to that. So if you have a kid that's trying to get out of going home, or there's a reason that they joined every club at school so that they don't have to go home after school, right? What's different for them? What's going on that they're trying to avoid? Those kids who are running away are more at risk for future victimization, for being picked up or persuaded into trafficking, to being sexually solicited online. They're putting themselves in so much danger. So we want to pay attention. If a kid is telling us, like, I don't want to be at home, I'll do anything I have to do to stay away from home, we want to start asking those questions about what's different for those children. We also want to take notices at school, whether they're not going to school. But if you as a parent and your kid was like on D's, D's and F land, and all of a sudden they started getting A's and B's, what's going to be our response to that? Yes, right? They're not going to live with me until they're 40. Like, I'm going to be off the hook. Like, this kid is going to move out someday. We always think about those kids that go from good to bad, right? Those kids that kind of start to bottom out. But what we don't talk about is those kids that go from bad to good. You will have kids that go from better to worse, from worse to better, and some kids that stay the same. But paying attention, we've had cases, or there have been cases, where teachers have bribed children to stay quiet by passing their grades. So if all of a sudden they really struggle with math and they're having an F, and now all of a sudden they have straight A's, what's going on, right? You know your kid struggles with math. What's their motivation for getting an A? Maybe they just got tired of you nagging on them about it, but maybe there's something else going on, right? So one of the hardest conversations I had to have with my kids when I left DSS and I came here, because even at DSS, I still lived in a world where I got to say it was the stranger. How many of you have taught your children stranger danger? It's okay to admit. I had to go back to my children and say, it's not going to be someone you don't know. It's going to be somebody at our Thanksgiving table. And they kind of looked at me and they're like Grandpa? Yeah, it could be Grandpa. I don't want to build this fear that every family member is out to hurt them, but I wanted to have a real conversation that says sometimes people that we love and trust hurt us, and that hurts the most, but you still get to tell me. I had to change the narrative, and that was harder for me to look at my sweet children and go, I don't care if Grandpa's at the door or a policeman's at the door, you still get to come get me, and we'll figure it out. When we look at the statistics nationally, we're talking about bio fathers as being the #1 perpetrator of child sexual abuse against their own children. You know, we've got friend of the family, and that's going to be teachers, soccer coaches, their best friend's dad, mother's boyfriend, brother, birth or step, cousin, uncle, stepfather, and grandfather. Less than 10% of child sexual abuse is inflicted by someone that child doesn't know. People that are experiencing, or children that are perpetrated on by strangers, they're more likely to tell. Brandy's done 1,300 interviews, less than 10. How many true strangers have you had? You've done what, 5,000? Seven. So most of the time when kids go, I don't know who it was, I was at a party, I was passed out, most of the time those kids, somebody knew that person at that party. Whose party was it? It was my brother's, right? There's some sort of connection for them. 30 to 60% are going to be family members, which complicates everything. Not only are they known to the child, but they're probably in a caretaking role, or there's somebody that they had a close relationship to, and those are the violations of the most intimate forms of trust. And it makes it even harder for these kids to come forward and to talk about. And when we look at, strangers or acquaintance offenders who are preferential offenders, men who prefer little boys have an average of 50 victims. Little girls have an average of 50 victims, but men who prefer little boys have an average of 152 victims. Remember that beginning statistics where we said 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys? Those statistics for boys are probably much higher, but it's harder for boys to tell because we still live in a world where men can't be raped. And when you see those news articles come out about teacher and student relationship, and it's like all the comments, it's terrible. I really need to stay off Facebook, but it's always like, atta boy, right? Why would he complain about that? Why would he tell? Our society doesn't make it okay for kids to tell. I had an interview where a little boy and 2 little girls forced him to do intercourse with them, and his dad congratulated him on having a threesome. That was the message that 10-year-old got. And I feel like that's what our society is telling our boys right now, right? So you add all of those dynamics into how this happens, right? We get that question a lot. We get this question a lot, like, why didn't the kid tell right away? Why would the kid be involved in that? Kids should know better. We're still kind of in that world where we blame these victims, and we're blaming little kids about it. Yeah. Mhm. Sandusky. Mhm.
And that was all coming, open to the public. And then it came to a complete halt. Do you think that with all the female victims that are empowering themselves and being courageous and sharing their stories and coming out, do you think that's going to happen with the men too? Because I'm sure there are men out there that have been. I would hope
That with the movement of where women are standing up and they're saying enough is enough, and I'm going to speak my truth, that we could see that same kind of bravery come from men. But I'll be honest, the narrative out there is still, what happened to being guilty until proven, or innocent until proven guilty? What happened to proving beyond a reasonable doubt? What happened to you can't just come after somebody for money 25 years later? You should have spoke up sooner. So that is the narrative that is currently being filtered through all of those stories. So I fear that it is that stigma for men are still going to continue to be, and until we can change the narrative for all victims, it's going to be even harder for men to come forward. But I think you're absolutely right. And again, for all types of victims, we get why didn't they say something sooner? Right? A lot of effort goes into creating these relationships with preferential offenders and their victims, right? And when I say grooming, I'm talking about a practice of manipulation in which they create this relationship that it's almost impossible for a kid to get out of. But it's not just men who are grooming their victims, it's women, and it is children. So teens, older teens that have already started to develop a preference, if you will, for small children, or they've been acting out sexually and they haven't received somebody to stand in the gap and they haven't received that help in those intervention services, they will start grooming children using force or similar tactics to adults in order to get their victims to stay engaged in that with them. So when we talk about these grooming behaviors, I want you to think of them like boundaries, right? Teaching your kids really good boundaries, but also being aware and trusting your own gut on these issues. The first step for any offender is going to be to identify a victim. It's almost as if some of these kids have targets on their back. Kids that are victimized one time are, I think it's like 33% more likely to be victimized again. So once they've already been sexually abused, it's more likely to happen to them again. There are actually handouts and handbooks out there on the dark web that will tell you how to groom a child into these relationships. There are organizations that have printed these documents to share with people that are interested in creating these relationships with kids. So they identify these victims, and it's going to be a victim that's less likely to tell. It's going to be a kid that has a lot to lose. And so again, we might think of that kid, that latchkey kid, that kid that doesn't have a strong male role model, somebody who's more at risk for this. But sometimes it's those kids that are the captain of the football squad or the cheerleader squad, the football team and the cheerleading squad, right? Because if they tell, what are they at risk for? Complete and utter humiliation. And boys, they're victimized because just, again, that narrative that gets said, you can't be raped if you're a male. So they're going to pick a victim, but most of these offenders who are preferential offenders, they're kind of slick, they're kind of smart. And they're going to spend a lot of time grooming everyone else around that child. So if grandma's super protective and grandma doesn't want to let that person near their sweet little grandbaby, they're going to spend a lot of time convincing grandma what a great person they are. Because what happens is, if they have if and when they offend on that child, and that child is brave and they speak up and they share their truth, who's going to be the first one to say they never saw it coming? Grandma, right? They're going to use those relationships to get you to doubt yourself. A lot of us got away from trusting our instincts. So we get someone and they just don't sit right with us, right? Our guts kind of like telling us like, maybe this person doesn't have good intentions for me and my family. And society tells us we have to be nice. And society will tell us we're just being overprotective. And they're going to have rehearsed speeches. So I watched this training working with sexual offenders, and they said, this video of this guy said, I always practice my responses. They're going to tell a little bit of truth in a big lie, just enough to make you think that you're crazy and you made the whole thing up. So if a kid says, yeah, he offended on me, or he touched me when he was tutoring me on Tuesdays, and it was every Tuesday, and he touched me every Tuesday. And that they're going to go to that offender, and they're going to go, did you do this? And he's going to go, oh my gosh, I took time out of my schedule for that kid. Nobody wanted to help that kid. He was a bad kid. And now he's saying this? Yeah, I tutored him every Tuesday, but I would never touch him. It was a little bit of truth in that big lie. So he's going to admit to seeing that kid on Tuesday, but he's going to say enough for us to go, oh my gosh, you're right. Oh, you're such a saint. You're really taking on these at-risk youth, right? It's enough to make us doubt our reasonable sense as adults. And that's that tree of safety. Offenders who prefer these children, they're going to be in positions of power. Maybe coaches on a team. Maybe working at a church. Maybe working at someplace like Children's Home. They're going to be in a position of power because they're going to build their lives, maybe dedicated. Sandusky was so good at the tree of safety, he even created that at-risk camp for those boys where he could just have victims at his fingertips, literally. And his tree of safety was so good that a janitor, when they walked in on him, and he was in the shower with the boys, and the janitor told management, said, you must be wrong. And that was years before that case ever came forward. There are still people in Sandusky's town that say he's such a good guy, he would never do that. Even after all of that, there will still be people that say, I don't believe it. Because it's about filling a void for that family. Maybe they'll pick a poor child that doesn't get to go to Chuck E. Cheese, and they're going to take them to Chuck E. Cheese every month. And there's going to be a payment, and there's going to be expectations for that. Or who's paying mom's car payment? Or who's paying dad's cell phone bill? You don't have to tell kids that. They're sharp. They understand that. They're going to fill a void because what happens is if they tell, where are they going to live? Right? Who's going to take care of them? And it becomes as simple as creating that relationship. So there's 3 main tactics or common tactics that we see with offenders. They're going to start by creating an environment where they can touch. Sandusky did it with a hand on the thigh. And as his relationship progressed with that boy, his hand would move up the thigh. But he always had a hand on Matthew Sandusky, his son, his adopted son. He always had a hand on him. It was reminding him that he couldn't get too far away from him, and he always had control over him. They want to get used to kids having their touch. Maybe it's through massages or wrestling. We get a lot of wrestling or tickling, right? They're going to use other ruses to get that kid used to that interaction. Most offenders identify as heterosexual men, and they use heterosexual porn to entice a child. They used to have to leave their magazines open and hope the kid kind of stumbled upon it, or it was a little bit trickier, but now it's as simple as pulling up a device and go, you know what that is, don't you? That's okay, I'll help you. I'll help you figure it out. So they're going to use porn to introduce topics to our kids because porn's wrong, right? Kids know that they're not supposed to look at that, those images. And so they're going to create this environment of secrecy and shame just by exposing the child. And then they're going to use it to introduce new topics to them. And then, of course, bathrooms. We're back to bathrooms. Kids are, as your kids are growing up, my kids are 10 and 12, so bathroom time is now separate. But when they were little, One would be in the tub, one would be on the toilet. I would be getting ready for work, right? That's how families work. You kind of shuffle people through, and maybe little kids, they bathe together, but they're used to being helped in the bathroom. They're used to having an adult present with them while they're undressed, or they're in the bathroom, or they're on the toilet. So what happens when the abuse occurs in the bathroom? What happens when she gets off the toilet and he touches her every time she gets done? And she says, my uncle touched me. Where were you? In the bathroom. A lot of us just will say, oh, he must have been helping you go to the bathroom, because we don't want to believe that it's anything else. There have been interviews that have been done, and this little 6-year-old, her uncle was touching her every time in the bathroom. And mom had enough sense to ask that next question about why he was in the bathroom with her. She didn't need any help. She didn't need any help wiping. But he was hoping that using the bathroom as a ruse or as kind of a cover would disguise his behavior. Once they've initiated contact, it becomes about control. People that don't want to do the right things by our kids or the right things by us, it's not that hard to control the situation. Kids are sweet. They're innocent. They don't want to get anyone in trouble. But so a threat works really well. If you tell, mom won't believe you, you'll go into foster care, I'll go to prison, your mom will cry all the time, and it's going to be all your fault. I can't tell you how many times that came true for little girls that came into custody or little boys that came into custody. It's not that hard for these offenders to come up with these threats. Or maybe they'll use our words against us. Again, as a well-intentioned parent, full disclosure tonight, I looked at my sweet little kid and I said, don't let anyone steal you. And without even realizing it, I made it her responsibility to keep herself safe from everyone in the world. Some little word like, don't let someone do this, can be turned around and it becomes, you weren't supposed to let me touch you, were you? I don't want you to get in trouble, so I won't tell if you don't. And just like that, they've created this secrecy. And let's be honest, a lot of these touches don't hurt. Pictures, kisses, those things don't hurt, because when it hurts, they're more likely to tell right away. And they're never going to call it abuse. They're never going to say, it's time to abuse you now, let's go to the bedroom. They're going to tell our kids or their victims, they're going to tell their victims that this is what all dads do with their daughters. This is what all coaches do for their teammates. This is how it works. This is how I show you I love you. This is normal. And the kid is going to believe that because they trust that person and they love that person. Why would that person lie? Because adults know everything, right? So we have these dynamics of why these kids don't tell. I would want to think that my kid would come screaming and crying to me if this happened. But the reality is kids feel a lot of shame and embarrassment. And adults know everything. Sometimes kids think that they've told adults when they haven't told us anything. And so what happens is they think they told mom what was happening, and because she didn't do anything, because they didn't really tell her, maybe they used words that they thought she understood, they just put up with it. Because he was right, mom didn't believe me. Or, I don't want to lose our house, so I'll just deal with it. We don't want to think our kids would do that or would put up with it. But kids do a lot to protect their parents. They want to protect us from hurt. They don't want to see mom cry. They don't want to see dad get mad or upset. So they'll do a lot to protect us without us even having to ask for it. And so what we get are these delayed or unconvincing disclosures, because 25 to 35% of kids wait to tell, and some never will, because they never feel safe enough to tell their truth. And some kids, they tell, and then the heat was too much, and so they say it didn't happen. Kids are more likely to lie about it not happening when it did than they will lie about it happening when it didn't. There's just not enough reward for them to make these stories up. So we always want to start by believing. So remember, whatever it is that your kid is coming to tell you, it's usually a process. Do your kids come home from school and just disclose everything that happened that day? Hey, Mom, I had a great day. Let me tell you all about it. How was school? Fine. Who'd you sit with? The same. How's math? Oh, whatever, right? That's the responses we get. We don't get, Mom, let me tell you all about my day. It was so good, right? If only it could be like that. So what happens is it's this big, long event, and they're going to kind of test the waters. So kids will tell things in 3 ways, and I've kind of found this to be true for all things, whether it's abuse or just troubles at school. First, it's going to be prompted. They want to come to you. They can help you. They know that you can help them. They want your help. They're ready to tell you. Mom, the bully at school is really picking on me. Mom, something happened on my cell phone. I don't know how to handle it, right? They're going to come to you. But more often than not, we're going to get accidental disclosures. Thank you, social media, for making everything accident. Well, I told my best friend what happened, but I didn't think she was going to tell her mom. So sometimes we get really ticked off teenagers in our chair because they Snapchatted their best friend, right? And then she showed it to her mom, and then her mom called the police. They weren't ready to share their truth. They just thought that the other kid was going to keep it a secret for them. And then we get prompted. That's when we're talking to our kids about their bodies, or we're talking to them about cyberbullying, or we're having some important conversation about how to be the best human ever. And they say, oh, you mean that I shouldn't push that kid off the slide every day at school? Right, let's not do that, right? Those prompted discussions that come out of us talking to them about, like, what if this happened, or what should you do if this happened? But they're going to give it to you a little bit at a time. When it's really tough, when it's really secret, when it's really embarrassing, they're going to test the waters. So it's going to look like this. Maybe they tell their best friend that they don't like when their brother or their stepbrother stays at their house. And they tell their teacher about how they got a brand new lock on their bedroom door, but they only have to use it when their stepbrother comes over. And then they come and tell you what's really going on. She was giving pieces of the puzzle all along, but she was testing the waters to see who could handle it. It's very normal for kids to either give us all the information, right, to give us the big disclosure, or to give you just what they think you can handle. So sometimes kids will come in and tell a complete stranger the worst part of what had happened to them and their abuse story because they don't have to watch mom cry through it. So remember that it's okay to work with that team, and it's okay to talk to other people and say, have you noticed anything different about my child? Use the fact that your kid sees a teacher, or they see the school counselor, or that they're in these groups to draw in that information so that we can get the best picture, right? There's a reason we want you involved with the teachers. There's a reason we want you to have those conversations. And remember that sometimes kids say things that don't make sense. Little kids will say things like, he put rocks in my butt and it really hurt, right? And we're like, that's not even possible. Like that wouldn't be something I would have noticed that. Allowing that child to describe what those rocks are gives us a story, right? They might not have the words for what actually happened. And sometimes older kids use fantastic statements because they wish it didn't happen and it did. So sometimes they'll say, well, I kicked him in the stomach and I ran out the window. Nothing ever happened. Is that what you wanted to have happen, or is that what actually had happened? Or is that really what happened? So allowing them again to just give freedom and give space to being able to talk about what they need to talk about. So know that if your child tells you anything, it's probably a gift, right? Especially as the older they get and the less that they want to tell you. There's like that period of teenage years where they don't want to say anything. Know that they've chosen you specifically for that. Know that they trust you enough to handle the information. But you don't have to solve that on your own. So if they come and they say something to you like, Mom, somebody sent me a text message, somebody sent me a picture, or I sent a sexy picture of myself, I don't know how to handle it. You don't have to figure it out in that moment. There are professionals out there. We can help wrap around you as a team. All you have to do in that moment is be there for that child. Thank you. I believe you. I'm sorry this happened to you. We're going to get some help. We're going to figure it out. That is the best thing that you can do for a child. It takes the immediate weight of having to deal with your emotions or your feelings about it. It takes it off the table. Write down what that child said. If you know that you're going to have to talk to the police or somebody like Holly or myself, write down what that child said. And if they're an older kid, let them know that you had to talk to someone. Because they'll think that you're a parent and that you can handle it, and they don't realize that the police are going to get involved. Or maybe if you're a professional, that CPS is going to get involved. Let them know that you had to talk to someone. And be prepared to set a good tone for them. If there are words that you can't handle, if your kids are 12 and 13 and they still don't use the proper words for their body parts, go ahead and get that out of the way right now. Right? We don't want that minute that their child chooses to disclose something that you're like, nope, can't do it. I'm going to back out of this one. Kids say the honest truth about what's going on, and they'll use words that you never thought you would ever hear come out of their mouths. Be prepared for that, right? If you can't say penis and vagina without laughing, I want you to go home and practice it in the mirror until you can say it without laughing. Because what happened was I said it to my kids all at once, and then they laughed, and then I laughed, and it was kind of disastrous. But we had to have that conversation, right? So just know what your kind of your own barriers and what your own issues are, and be able to be ready to receive whatever your child wants to tell you. Whether that's drinking, or that's drugs, or that's sexting, know kind of what your personal biases are so that you can kind of work through those before your kids need to talk to you about something really serious. But what we don't want you to do is ask any investigative questions. Don't deny or dismiss because of who you think it is or what you think is going on. Just start by believing. And you do not have to figure out the case all by yourself. We'll walk alongside of you in that. We'll help you do that. Your two best phrases for any situation are, tell me about that, tell me what happened. Those two open-ended phrases will open up a world of dialogue. If they're ready to tell you, they will tell you everything that they've got to say. And if they don't, that's okay too. But those two phrases aren't going to stop Holly or I or Brandy from being able to do our job and do those investigations, right? So tell me about that. Tell me what happened. It works on your husband if he's feeling not talkative that day because he's really upset at work. I've started using it on my own husband and my 12-year-old, and before they know it, they're talking with me until they realize that they're talking with me, and then they're like, oh, why does mom have to be an interviewer, right? So go ahead and practice it on your spouse or your significant other. So I want to just talk about a couple things on this slide because Holly has a great presentation. I don't want to run into that. We don't teach secrets. Surprises are fun. Everyone gets to find out. Teaching kids to keep secrets gets really confusing because perpetrators will use that against us. And they'll tell them to keep a secret. And if your kid grows up in a family where secrets are kept, that's normal for them to keep secrets. So my kids, we don't get to keep secrets. That means if we have ice cream for dinner, my 10-year-old gets to tell my husband. Right? We were at the voting station, and my daughter goes, who are you voting for? I said, I'm not going to tell you. She goes, we don't keep secrets. And I'm like, ah. But it's creating that environment where they get to tell you everything. Mom and dad always get to find out. And I want to just highlight code words because I talked to you about trusting your own gut. We have to teach our kids to trust their gut too. They don't always have to be nice, and they don't always have to like everyone. And we want to talk to them about if you're feeling uncomfortable, if your stomach feels upset, or you feel like you have to go to the bathroom, or you feel like something's just kind of fuzzy or it doesn't feel right. Talk to them about what uncomfortable or unsafe means, but give them a code word, right? There's a lot of social media out there where you can just text an X, right? Cheyenne and I have a code word. I recommend teaching the code word before you leave the house. Otherwise, she was like 8 at the time, and she announced it to the entire laundromat what her code word was. And she's like, what if I really want to eat that, though? Then how do I say that? Okay, I'll whisper it if it's a code word, and I'll say it normal if I really want to eat that particular food. That was our code word process. So, but this idea that if she ever felt uncomfortable or she ever needed to get out of something, she can text me her code word, and I'm going to give her an out. I'm going to be the bad mom that pulls her out of the sleepover. I'm going to be the bad mom that comes and gets her and yells at her in front of her friends about she made a bad decision. We're going to go, and then we can talk about it, right? And she gets to blame me in front of her friends and save face. She doesn't have to tell them that she actually wants to go home. But I want to talk about what if. Because all of my tips, all of our tips about keeping kids safe start with a conversation. Research shows that if you can help prepare kids for situations before they happen, they're more likely to make positive decisions in that moment. It works for us too, right? If we plan ahead, we're more prepared to respond positively to situations. Ask your kids the questions. What if someone sent you a picture of a body part, right? What if someone wanted you to send them pictures? What if your friend came and said that someone was hurting them and wanted you to keep it a secret? These are the issues that our kids are facing today, whether we like it or not, whether we want it to happen or not, because it doesn't matter if they go to public school or they're homeschooled, they're not with them 24/7. They have to be out there, and they're dealing with coaches and teammates and people that don't have the same level of supervision that you do for your children. So having those conversations with them and getting them talking is the key to keeping them safe, right? Talking to them about their bodies and giving them control and consent over their bodies. Kids don't know what consent means. We have to talk to them about that. I have to talk to my 12-year-old about how he doesn't get to touch a girl because he thinks she's pretty, right? I have to talk to my kids about you don't get to hit each other, right? That's a constant conversation. You don't get to hit each other. But this idea behind prepping our kids for the real world and not having those blinder on as parents and saying, well, it's not going to happen to my kid because I'm with them all the time. Unless you go to the bathroom with them and you go to school with them and you go to every sports activity and you go to every Girl Scout or whatever activity with them, you're not with them all the time. And there are a lot of kids that just come from different kinds of life, and we need to make sure that our kids know what to do, because even if nothing happens to them, I want my kid to be the kind of kid that's going to say something if someone else says, if their friend comes to them and says something's going on. I want my kid to be the kid that's going to come tell me, right? So we have these cards, and they're for every age level, 3 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 13, and 14 on up, and they change topics based on what our kids are facing. But even if you never buy a deck of cards and you just come up with your own what if, I really encourage you to start those tough conversations. We don't want our kids to get to college and go, I don't know what to do if this happens, right? We want to start preparing them now. Speaking of preparing them, I'm going to turn this over to Holly, because the internet is a dark and scary place. So, Holly, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I think we should give Tiffany a round of applause because that was awesome. Oh, I need this. All right, so my name is Holly Strand. I'm a forensic examiner with the Pennington County Sheriff's Office. My job is